The Five Nights at Freddy's timeline may not literally be one of the world's greatest mysteries, but it's definitely one that the fans of the franchise have been stuck on for a while. But while it's typically seen as a complicated topic, especially when it comes to the more recent games, I think the story is a lot more cohesive than people give it credit for. So with the new year starting and a whole year of potential lore ahead of us, it's time for part 2 of the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. Real quick before I get started, there are a couple corrections I need to make to part 1. First, Fredbear's singing show was likely an actual restaurant that predated Fredbear's Family Diner, based on a mention of the singing show being a restaurant in Secret of the Mimic. However, Fredbear's Family Diner was still established before the events of Secret of the Mimic, having posters and seemingly being mentioned by Edwin in the game. Also, I think that the FNAF 2 location wasn't a new building or had entirely new animatronic designs. While the toy animatronics were still new as of FNAF 2, the restaurant, as implied by the FNAF 2 newspapers, was a reopening of one of the franchise locations. Finally, I had said that Phone Guy died on his 4th night at Freddy's, when he actually died on his 5th based on the interactive novel. He just skipped recording a call on his 4th night. As per usual, this timeline is based on my own interpretations of the lore, and for the sake of time, I won't be going into too much detail with the evidence in this video. If there's something you disagree with or don't understand why I'd suggest it, I'll have the videos where I go into more detail about the topics linked in the description of this video. But without further ado, where we left off in part 1, Michael Afton had been fired from Freddy's again, and William Afton was trapped behind a wall, rotting away in the spring bodysuit as Springtrap. With the closure of Freddy's and William getting sealed, things entered a bit of a lull period. Michael was still searching for his dad, but he wasn't exactly successful considering his dad was stuck behind a wall in the location he had just been at. The Funtime animatronics, as entered, were roaming around under the direction of Circus Baby for a while, but eventually most of them got sick and tired of Baby bossing them around and kicked her out of the collective. Funtime Freddy then became the dominant personality of the entity that would now be known as Molten Freddy. Molten Freddy and Baby scavenged for parts to rebuild their bodies, potentially grabbing stuff from old Fazbear locations. Molten Freddy was a bit less successful in putting together an actual body, likely because he was made up of multiple different entities, so he just kind of ended up as a pile of robot spaghetti with pieces to make a mask that sort of looked like Funtime Freddy. But Baby found enough stuff to build a recognizable form, known as Scrap Baby. While looking for parts, it's possible that they raided Freddy's and made off with some of the haunted parts, whether it be to make their bodies with, or because it's later implied that they may be interested in obtaining Remnant for its power. Additionally, over the decades that the restaurant was abandoned, it probably would have been a target for theft and decay, though the safe room that contained William was protected somewhat by the false wall. Because of this, the Haunted Freddy's animatronics had fallen apart or been broken over the years. Many of their parts were still there, at least to some extent, but they were no longer whole and functional. This becomes relevant once 30 years have passed since Freddy's closed its doors, presumably without those doors opening since the closure, making it 30 years after the last time Freddy's had closed in 1993, and around that time, a local amusement park decided it would be in excellent taste to set up a haunted house based on the Freddy's murders called Fazbear's Fright. Not to be confused with Fazbear Frights, the book series. However, because of the time that had passed with the animatronics being exposed and able to be damaged, they were only able to find random memorabilia and parts of animatronics in the old Freddy's locations, but not any complete ones they could use to really give their attraction the authentic Freddy Fazbear's vibe. They did what they could with what they found though. Using some old pictures, some other random stuff, and a used security logbook as reference, they put together a physical location that got the spooky vibe they wanted, potentially even making use of an old Fazbear restaurant in the process for extra authenticity. Though the authenticity of everything did also mean that there was a significant fire risk, but surely that wouldn't have consequences. They also hired a security guard to both act as security and to set the scene more. Specifically, they hired Michael Afton, who had figured that maybe he'd have more luck tracking his dad down if he didn't wait for news of what was probably William causing problems, especially since he hadn't actually been getting news of him for a while due to Springlock and boarded up room related reasons that Michael was unaware of. And hey, it did end up working out because the Fazbear's Fright crew managed to get in contact with a guy who had worked on the original buildings, who told them about the off-camera safe rooms getting boarded up back in the day. So they went to raid another Freddy's, broke down the wall, and wouldn't you know it, but there was a funky green rabbit animatronic just sitting there. Sure, he was decayed a bit and smelled like a corpse, but that was to be expected with something sitting abandoned in a damp, musty room for decades, right? Totally not because there was a reanimated corpse in there. So they carted a decayed, spring-locked William Afton back to their horror attraction where father and son were finally reunited. It was about as touchy-feely as you'd expect, and ended with Michael using the flammable nature of the building to try and get his dad gone for good. However, Michael didn't set the building on fire immediately. First, he had to help the spirits of his brother and the missing kids who were present in the building due to some of their parts getting brought in for the attraction. With help from Charlie, who was present as the puppet even if not particularly active, and some haunted dreams that clued him in on how to help, they were able to set up a party for the spirits, giving them the happiness that they weren't able to have in their lives, culminating in a cake being given to the spirit of Mike's younger brother in the restaurant where his birthday party had originally gone so wrong. And with that, the spirits were able to move on. Sort of. There was one big issue. Due to the way Charlie had initially tried to help give give them life, the spirits' fates were tied together. And if one spirit wasn't ready to move on, none of them would. Except for Charlie, but she chose to stick around because she wanted to help. And one spirit in particular was still too angry to move on. Having died feeling anger and a desire for revenge on the man who murdered her, Cassidy, the spirit possessing Golden Freddy with the crying child, still wanted to get back at William. And since she wasn't willing to move on, the others also weren't able to either. Especially since William escaped the fire after Mike used the plausible deniability of the fire risk to get away with arson. This was further not helped by William using some of Golden Freddy's parts to repair his damaged suit, linking Golden Freddy and Springtrap, even as William Afton was able to slowly regrow the broken and rotted parts of his body with Remnant. But speaking of repairing things, if you've been struggling to repair your sleep experience, you're in luck because this video is sponsored by Titan. Having a mattress that's super stiff and doesn't actually support your body is not particularly pleasant for a good sleeping experience. Fortunately, Titan mattresses are made to be comfortable with premium materials at a reasonable price, with their designs being made by master craftsmen who have been building mattresses for decades. I personally have started using the Titan Plus Elite mattress over winter break, and let me tell you that it was probably the most comfortable sleep I have had in a while. I didn't wake up throughout the night, and I felt like my body shape was actually being supported instead of having to lay down awkwardly to avoid feeling like my body was bending weird angles to lie flat against the bed. I hadn't realized how much better mattresses could be than the ones I had used in the past, and boy did using this one show me. But while that's all well and good for me, the good news for you is that if you use the link in the description, pinned comment, and QR code on screen, and code IDs Fantasy, you can get 30% off your own order from Titan Mattress. Shipping is free, and the mattresses come conveniently rolled up in a box to make it easier for you to get it to where it needs to be in your home before you unroll it. And if the mattress ends up not being to your tastes, you'll have easy access to returns and exchanges with a 120-day sleep trial offered to help you make sure that the mattress is the right fit for you and your sleep style. And if you do end up ordering, you can support my channel by mentioning I sent you in your post-purchase survey. So if that sounds good to you, make sure to use the link in the description, pinned comment, and QR code, and use code IDs Fantasy for 30% off your order. That's code IDS FANTASY to get your own Titan mattress. But back to the topic at hand, as for Fazbear's Fright, with its main attraction gone and the building burned down, they didn't have much hope of getting things fixed. So to make up some of their losses, they decided to auction off what they had left, including the haunted animatronic parts. And this is where William's ex-business partner Henry finally comes back into the story. Henry had been stewing over what had happened for decades, and had a habit of collecting newspaper clippings and blueprints related to Freddy's, William, and the murders that had happened, trying to come to terms with it and understand what had happened. So when he saw the auction mentioned in the paper, he actually ended up getting a hold of the animatronic parts. From there, he was able to combine the fact that the animatronic heads were ominously glowing sometimes with what he learned from the blueprints, other information he collected, and potentially even some haunted dreams where the kids were there and able to speak for themselves, since that is something that can happen, and Henry finally realized what had happened to them. First, William Afton had taken the lives of the children, trapping their spirits in the animatronics Henry had helped to create. And then he harvested some of their remnant and broke them again. Not only that, but on top of the spirits still connected to the Freddy's animatronics, William had injected the remnant he'd taken into the murderous animatronics that had been present at Circus Babies. And that was in addition to Henry realizing that Elizabeth Afton's disappearance coincided with the closure of Circus Baby's Pizza World and Baby's subsequent change in eye color, implying Baby's possession, which also meant that when the puppet changed after collapsing on his daughter's body, Charlotte's spirit must have bonded to the puppet as well. While Henry had considered ending his own life over his pain, finding out the state of the children motivated him to find a way to help the children rest first. And using what he collected, he figured out a plan. In William's blueprints for the scooper in the Circus Baby's bunker, William had written notes about his observations on Remnant, since the scooper was a remnant injector. In those notes, William mentioned that remnant activity decreased with high levels of heat, and he theorized that sufficiently high temperatures would neutralize the remnant permanently. And since remnant is the substance created by the overlap of the non-physical spirits and physical metal, if that was destroyed, theoretically the spirits would be released. Henry just had to find a way to get all the haunted animatronics in one place to be destroyed. So being one of the original people involved with Fazbear Entertainment, Henry was able to set up a new Freddy's where he could gather all the haunted stuff in general before burning it all and destroying the remnant. Though it wasn't entirely a new Freddy's. It was once again built in the same location as the original, on top of the tunnels that were once Murray's Costume Manor and Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, giving Henry plenty of space to store all the haunted and otherwise Fazbear-related stuff. This included the F10N4 machine and the mimic endoskeleton that was being contained by it, which Fazbear had gotten their hands on at some point and messed with, though we don't really know what they did other than rename FuhNaff's, since that machine is either what always had or ended up containing the Cradle program to limit M2, and that it seems like William may or may not have tampered tampered with the code himself, giving it a link to other animatronics, including Spring Bonnie. Anyway, once the Barebones restaurant was set up and fitted with burners that would set the place on fire, Henry set up the lure. The Funtime animatronics were apparently after Remnant, so Henry sent out a message pretending to be William like, "Hey, you guys should all come over here, I've got the goods for you," to convince them to show up. For Charlie, he knew that wouldn't work for her, so he created an animatronic named Lefty that would lure the puppet in, making use of the marionette's programming to look for certain wristband colors before capturing it. Lefty would then keep the spirit relatively pacified before making its way to the restaurant. After getting that ready, Henry went looking for an employee to run the restaurant and take the heat so that if something were to go wrong, Henry could come up with another plan. After all, there weren't many people who knew what was going on who would be able to find ways to set everyone free. Though, ironically enough, the first guy interested in being a Freddy's franchisee and running a restaurant was one who did know what was going on, because Michael Afton was back again after realizing that things hadn't worked as well as he'd hoped. But hey, Henry wasn't going to be choosy, and considering Michael's situation, figured that Mike would probably also be on board with trying to stop everything before moving on. So he hired Mike, gave him instructions to bring in any animatronics that showed up, and set him to work. Over the course of the week, Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Lefty with the puppet, and even William himself appeared, though William knew full well that something was up considering he knew that he didn't send out a message saying Remnant was there, but he wanted to see how things played out, so he showed up anyway. Though he probably wished he hadn't when at the end of the week, once everyone was there, Henry sprung the trap, informing everyone that the message hadn't been sent by the person they thought, and setting the building on fire with the animatronics, the haunted stuff in the basement, as well as himself and Michael still inside to be consumed by the flames. The thing is, Henry's plan hadn't exactly taken into account the main issue that was keeping the spirits from moving on. Specifically, the fact that the spirits wouldn't be able to move on until they were all ready, and Cassidy wasn't going to let William go either before she could get her revenge. Conveniently for her, the animatronic she possessed had been grafted into William's suit, giving her the perfect opportunity to inflict the same pain on William that the animatronics had been inflicting on people, but mostly Michael, for decades. While Cassidy was advised by a spiritual entity called Old Man Consequences to leave William to his demons and rest her own soul, since there was nothing for her to gain from it, she forced William to take on the role of a security guard facing down the animatronic dangers that William had helped to create over the years, including recreations of himself. And since the other spirits were stuck there or voluntarily sticking around, they got in on it as well. However, despite the popular theory that William was being tormented in an actual afterlife by the vengeful spirit, based on the Fazbear Frights books having a similar situation in them, it was most likely him actually having a nightmare coma from within his actual body, which meant his spirit never moved on either, leaving the door open for him to find an escape attempt in the future. Speaking of which, while Henry had officially set Fazbear Entertainment to no longer be a corporate entity after the fire, it didn't exactly stay gone either. We haven't gotten much information on how it started up again, who did it, or why, but someone decided to bring it back, probably after finding the stuff in the remains of the pizzeria simulator, location, and underground facility, including the overcooked guy in a springlock suit and mixes. While there, it's possible that William was able to communicate with his hands or something, despite his mind being in the nightmare coma, similar to how he did in Frights. And under his guidance, they found out about the mimic programs linked to mixes and accessed the code, as well as took some old circuit boards that were either from mixes containing William's modifications, remnant from him, and or his memories, or ones directly from William in addition to more mimic-centric stuff. Either way though, whatever they ended up taking was possessed or controlled by William based on how Scott Cawthon, who writes The Lord, stated that he likes the idea of possession of AI in reference to liking the concept of a character that directly came from this situation called Glitchtrap. As for how Glitchtrap came to be, while it had been decades since the original Freddy's murders, that news story and the rumors of supernatural activity were still heavily associated with the brand. So to counter that, Fazbear secretly hired an indie game developer to make games based on the Freddy's rumors, which would give the company an excuse to make their own virtual reality games, making light of the actual events and passing them off as fictional so that people would dismiss them as entirely made up. This was successful to some degree from both an in-universe and real-world perspective. Originally though, Fazbear had outsourced production of the game to an external development studio, and gave them circuit boards supposedly to help with pathfinding. The thing is, the actual stuff on the circuit boards was the stuff that let William control the Mimic program, which manifested in the VR game as a fabric costume version of William's preferred persona, Spring Bonnie. This entity, Glitchtrap, could not only influence the digital world, but could sort of download itself into people's heads via certain technology, and influence their perceptions and actions as a result. This freaked out the game's first beta tester, Jeremy, who ended up glitch-trapped briefly and ended up with a special mask that implanted a chip in his head that could interface with his brain. Eventually, Jeremy managed to get the mask off and the chip out using a guillotine paper slicer on his face. And while he didn't die, he was permanently scarred, sued the company for damages, and wanted to get rid of the entity who had led to him being hurt and almost taken over. So when he eventually recovered, he took up working as a technician at the company the game was owned by with the hope that he'd find a way to destroy Glitchtrap. This will be important later. Meanwhile, with Jeremy gone, beta testing was taken up by a character known as Tape Girl. She also ended up noticing Glitchtrap and documented her thoughts on him in a series of audio tapes, as well as discussed how the circuit boards that they had been given had been stolen back. Glitchtrap eventually attached itself to her audio logs, and while Tape Girl did try to stop Glitchtrap by breaking her digital journal into pieces, Glitchtrap either took control of her to leave a message luring someone else in to get controlled, or used its mimic capabilities to imitate her voice and leave a message doing so instead. This ended up having consequences when Fazbear Entertainment took over production of the game, and a woman named Vanessa ended up as the beta tester. Vanessa assembled the logs and fell victim to Glitchtrap around the same time that Fazbear Entertainment started building a new location, Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, over the remains of Henry's Pizzeria and everything inside it. Around this point, a few things were going on. For one thing, the circuit boards that had been stolen back were also used to put Glitchtrap into animatronics for an animatronic delivery service thing that Fazbear had. When the animatronics were sent out, they would collect remnant, and from there they could bring that remnant back to use for projects like healing William, who was in very bad shape after being set on fire again. Additionally, Glitchtrap's influence and instructions for Vanessa led to her googling suspicious stuff on company time, like how far a human body could be cut in half before losing consciousness, which triggered some red flags in the system. One of the employees in charge of monitoring the red flags had a crush on her, so he kinda just ignored the both literal and metaphorical red flags for a while, but eventually she ended up being put in company-mandated therapy. Since this was a problem for William, who was trying to stay under the radar, he ended up having whoever it was who originally helped him spread Glitchtrap around create a robot clone of Vanessa and transfer the spirit of his daughter Elizabeth into her, which would explain some stuff like the two different Vanessas showing up in that one ending of Security Breach, why the two characters that were supposedly the same person have two different voice actresses in the same game, and why Vanessa seems to literally consider Glitchtrap to be her father. With this situation, the original Vanessa, aka Vanny, could operate full-time without suspicion, and the new Vanessa could deal with the work side of things and cover for Vanny if she ended up doing something that risked drawing suspicion. While being possessed by Elizabeth did make it possible for the new Vanessa to compartmentalize and lock Glitchtrap away in her mind, she stayed loyal to her father because, while she no longer had Circus Baby's murder programming, she did have the trauma of knowing that the last time she disobeyed her father, it ended up with her death. This comes to the third point, where a boy named Gregory was kidnapped, probably killed for remnant, and then replaced with a robot duplicate of himself that was under Glitchtrap's control. I know it's not a popular idea, but I don't know what else the one code in Security Breach that describes a bunch of stuff Gregory does in that game while also saying, "I built the breath they hunt, now drawn to life, not real, still keen," is supposed to mean other than Gregory being a robot that is hunted down by the animatronics in that game. Anyway, Gregory was very good with technology, so he hacked Vanessa's records to make them line up more with Elizabeth's memories in life, and also started going to sessions with Vanessa's therapists to keep an eye on things, killing them if they got too close to the truth. This worked out pretty well for a while, and Vanny was able to report to Glitchtrap that no one suspected anything was wrong, and that she'd put together a rabbit costume disguise. Gregory uploaded Glitchtrap into the newly completed Pizzaplex, which Vanessa let through despite the virus being flagged for quarantine, before she was transferred to working as a security guard at the building. Gregory also made friends with a girl named Cassie, who was the daughter of a certain Fazbear Entertainment technician named Jeremy. Another thing to note is that the animatronics at the Pizzaplex had very advanced AIs. Glitchtrap was in their systems, but they also had personality chips that led to them being somewhat sentient and having relationships with each other. Freddy and Bonnie were super close, and two characters who were brought back from the MCM era, Roxanne Wolf and Montgomery Gator, showed traits of vanity and jealousy respectively. At one point, one of the animatronics, Glamrock Bonnie, ended up finding out something he wasn't supposed to, though it's unclear what that was, and the prototype of Glamrock Freddy was sent to attack him in the Monty Golf attraction. Monty decided this was a great way to kill two birds with one stone and get himself put in as lead of the Fazbear band, and used the Hurricane Hole-in-One bucket to knock the two of them off the catwalks, badly damaging them both. Bonnie was hidden in the back of the bowling alley and replaced by Monty, but since it's kind of hard to have a Freddy's location without a Freddy, they built a new Freddy and transferred over the prototype's memory and personality chip. While things were going pretty well for William's plans, there were a few other players involved that would end up complicating things. For one, during the Pizzaplex's construction, the path to where William's body was in the pizzeria ended up getting blocked by debris. So Vanny took the new Glamrock Freddy there to clear the way down so Vanny could set up shop and fix William up. The thing is, Michael Afton had kind of made it his purpose to make sure his dad got dealt with, and said dad was still being a problem. So when an unoccupied animatronic had to move Michael's corpse, Mike's spirit jumped ship and occupied Glamrock Freddy, though he did promptly fall victim to the typical spirit memory issues problem and lost his identity as Michael. On top of this, while Cassidy may no longer have had power over William the way she used to in the nightmare coma, she still wanted him gone and had followed him into the VR game and into a mobile game that turned arcade game series called Princess Quest, which was set up as William's main access point to control Glitchtrap and the things going on at the Pizzaplex. While she couldn't stop William on her own, she was poised to destroy him as soon as she was given the chance and a person she trusted to help her. And since they were possessing the same animatronic initially, the crying child ended up being active as well, though instead of being with Cassidy in Princess Quest, he ended up possessing Gregory, allowing Gregory to break free of Glitchtrap's control, but without the ingrained trauma-based loyalty to William Afton that Elizabeth had. That being said, compartmentalizing Glitchtrap's influence also ended up with him compartmentalizing all of the time he had spent with Glitchtrap controlling him, which left Gregory with significantly fewer memories than he started out with, on top of the whole issue of spirits forgetting their lives thing. So he remembered his friendship with Cassie, but didn't know who Vanessa was or clearly remember being the crying child. Glitchtrap wasn't too happy about losing Gregory and had Vanessa and the animatronics keep an eye out for him and try to apprehend him so that he wouldn't cause trouble, leading to Gregory hiding out in the Pizzaplex to try to not get caught, using a few locations as hiding spots where he tried to piece together some of his more confusing memories. Another spirit I think was likely in play around this time was Charlotte Emily. Charlie was also not willing to move on, given her whole deal was trying to first help the other ghost kids who were now all trapped in an amalgamated tangle of parts that contained their animatronic bodies under the Pizzaplex, so she found a way to leave her puppet vessel behind and haunted something in the Pizzaplex that may or may not have been another robot kid who we see evidence of in the building associated with the Chica animatronic. It seems implied that she interacted with Gregory in a room labeled Charlie Door in the Files that was full of papers that appear to be written by two people, had a table of Afton family staff bots, and nightmare marionette-themed staff bot heads all over the place. Eventually, Charlie and Gregory got found out though, and while Charlie was presumably successful in escaping, Gregory wasn't quite as lucky and ended up stuck in the Pizzaplex. Glamrock Freddy caught sight of him during a show and crashed due to the combination of the programming to apprehend Gregory and the presence of Michael's spirit, with potentially other factors being involved, and woke up in his green room only to find a child hiding inside his stomach hatch. This was not a safe place for a child to be, so he had Gregory get out and found out that he wasn't a registered guest at the Pizzaplex, as well as the fact that Freddy was no longer connected to the building's security system due to booting up in safe mode. After encouraging Gregory to ask Vanessa for help, Gregory told him he didn't trust her because she was trying to get him, and Freddy agreed to help him escape both Vanessa and the other animatronics. Vanny was also there, but she didn't really do that much. At one point, after Freddy was temporarily captured, Gregory found out that the Glamrock animatronics all had special parts and decided to use them to upgrade Freddy. So he did, much to Freddy's concern about how he managed to get his hands on said parts, but in the end, Gregory eventually figured that if he just escaped himself, other people would keep getting hurt, so he decided to take action. From here, I'm not entirely sure things played out exactly as we see in a specific game ending, due to later entries in the series and how Scott Cawthon had mentioned that the answer to which ending of FNAF 3 was canon was that it was complicated. I'm currently of the opinion that it's probably a similar thing here due to a variety of factors. My current thought is that after fully upgrading Freddy, the two of them made their way to the pizzeria under the building using Freddy's upgrades, which triggered Freddy to start remembering his human identity and led to the two of them confronting William and setting him on fire again, as well as the animatronic Blob becoming active and going for revenge on William. He was able to briefly escape, crawling out of a vent in his room and making his way down to the room Mexes was in, before crawling through another vent, only to then crawl right back out because he recognized the murderous endoskeleton being contained in the other room and he was not going to be dealing with the mimic that day. Unfortunately for him, this gave the Blob an opportunity to nab him. The Blob's movements under the foundation ended up causing a minor earthquake that ended up damaging the building, though Gregory and Freddy managed to escape. Because of the damage, Jeremy, the formerly Glitchtrap Fazbear technician, was called in to fix stuff, which he did a little bit, leaving parts laying around and bringing out the old prototype of Freddy to replace the one who had, gotten up and walked away, but then he found Princess Quest. Cassidy shared his distaste for Glitchtrap and let him play the 3 games in the main pizzeria, cutting William off from the main Pizzaplex. However, when Jeremy went to the Sinkhole Pizzeria to beat Princess Quest 4, he ended up getting Glitchtrapped again via the Vanny security mask and let Glitchtrap out, though he did probably successfully kick out William's influence before Jeremy died and had his soul stuck in a staff bot that was originally meant to hand out maps. But presumably Vanny at one point repurposed it into handing out the Vanny masks in between her doing graffiti art around the building. Because William's influence over Glitchtrap was eliminated, this left the prevailing influence in the Pizzaplex to be the mimic programs he had been hijacking. At one point, Gregory went back to investigate the underground pizzeria, and he made contact with Mixes, who was able to explain the mimic to him. But Gregory didn't stick around the Pizzaplex for long and remained off the grid, potentially heading around to a different entrance to the formerly Circus Babies location to investigate things from there, without letting M2 out. The thing is, this ended up causing issues when M2 was able to get a hold of Gregory's walkie-talkie and found out about Cassie, making contact with her while pretending to be Gregory. The Gregory mimic, or Grimmick, acted like he was trapped in the Pizzaplex and needed Cassie to come save him. Gregory did have missing posters up, so Cassie went to the Pizzaplex and ended up being given a Vanny mask by the mask bot possessed by her father. Rather ironic that in his quest to get revenge on Glitchtrap, it ended up with him passing on his own curse to his daughter. Anyway, M2 used its connection to the mask to manipulate Cassie into deactivating the security nodes Mexes had set up to keep M2 trapped. Mexes was like, oh no, this is a problem, and asked Gregory to try to contact her to let her know he wasn't there while also taking action. Neither of them were particularly successful. But hey, Cassie Cassie made friends with her favorite character Roxy, so that was nice up until she had to disable the node in Roxy. Anyway, after M2 lured Cassie down to the basement of the pizzeria, where she disabled security and destroyed the concrete wall blocking the doorway, Cassie realized she had messed up. Roxy was barely able to protect her and hold off M2 long enough for Cassie to run, and Gregory finally made contact with Cassie, telling her that he had a friend with the building maps that Cassie should listen to the instructions of, which ended up being Mixes using Gregory's voice. While Cassie was able to mostly successfully escape and start to get an explanation from Gregory, Mixes didn't want to risk M2 getting out, and interrupted Gregory, using his voice to go back on Gregory's attempt to save her, cutting the elevator's power, leading to its crash. While we don't currently know for sure what game is going to come next outside of what may or may not be teasers for a continuation of this arc, that's currently where my understanding of the main timeline of the Five Nights at Freddy's game stands as of the release of this video. Thank you so much for watching through to the end, and consider sharing it with a friend if you enjoyed. Remember to use the link in the description, pinned comment, and QR code, and code IEDsFantasy to get 30% off your Titan mattress order. Don't get stabbed, and have a nice day.